My name is Agnes Whitmore. I am 65. I spent 37 years as a school librarian, teaching children how to find what matters and put it back where it belongs. I keep a white handkerchief my husband embroidered with a single blue wave. Richard is gone. The house is quiet, except for the Atlantic pressing its breath against the windows. 5 days after my husband's funeral, my daughter stood in my kitchen and set a folder on the table. She said, "The beachfront villa has been sold. Your share is $30,000. It was worth $10 million. I sat back and asked, "Who signed the contract?" Gwen, the realtor she brought, tucked a glossy brochure under her arm. Rosa, our longtime housekeeper, stood by the sink and turned the water off. I knew every board that had gone into that house. I knew the view it guarded. I knew what it had cost us to build it. Some debts are moral. Eliza did not look at the ocean framed in the window. She looked at me the way people look at a fence they plan to climb. Her voice was thin. This is how these things go. The market moves. Cash is better than memories. 30 will cover what you need. I can manage the rest. She said it as if money were medicine and I were the patient who would not swallow. I let the clock tick. I folded the handkerchief once. The thread of the little wave caught the light. I did not raise my voice. Decades in libraries taught me how silence can hold a room. I said again, "Who signed the contract?" Names matter. Signatures matter. The villa was poured by hand and framed with the smell of wet cedar. I know because I carried sandwiches to the men who worked through a summer of storms to set its bones. Gwen cleared her throat. She said the consortium had moved quickly. Titles would be recorded by close of business. We were fortunate to close before the quarter turned. She praised speed as if speed were a virtue. I thought of rip currents that look like smooth water and drag strong bodies out where they cannot touch. Eliza said, "Mom, please, do not make this harder. There are fees. There are taxes. There is timing." She wanted a signature from me the way a storm wants open shutters. I thought of the last words Richard wrote in a note I had not yet opened. He had placed it beneath the cedar box like a pressed leaf. I thought of him teaching our girl to float. He held her under the ribs and said, "Trust the water. Breathe. The ocean will carry you if you do not fight it." I breathed. I asked her if she had eaten. She blinked, startled by the ordinary. She said she had a meeting. The folder lay between us like a thin blade no one wished to name. $30,000 is an amount you tell a stranger. 10 million is a history. I looked at my daughter's hands. The polish was perfect. You could say this is where a mother argues. I did not. I poured tea. I set 3 cups. I let the steam rise. I waited for it to fade. I said I would read carefully. I said I would not sign today. I said again, "Who signed the contract?" My voice was steady. The question was a harbor. Either you enter with a true name, or you turn back to sea. Eliza gathered the folder with a small, impatient breath. Gwen smiled as if the commission had already been counted. They left by the back door. Rosa touched my sleeve and asked if I wanted the handkerchief pressed. I said no. I wanted it close. Outside, gulls sketched pale letters in the sky. The house returned to the sound it knows. The ocean kept the time. The wave on the handkerchief kept its blue. The kettle clicked back to quiet. The ocean took over again, steady and patient. I stood a long while with the handkerchief in my palm, the little blue wave like a stitch of breath, and the tea went cold. When I finally moved, I set 3 cups in the sink and rinsed them one by one, as if clarity could be washed into being. The kitchen window held a thin bar of winter sun. It felt honest to watch it fade. You ask me about the funeral. I answer now, though the answer returns like tide. 2 mornings earlier, the church smelled of cedar polish and lilies. People spoke in careful voices and kept glancing toward the door, as if the true guest might arrive late and repair what could not be repaired. I wore Richard's blue tie around my wrist beneath my sleeve. Rosa had shown me how to knot it soft. A private ribbon where a hand might find courage. Rosa pressed the handkerchief into my hand before the first hymn. Her eyes were red around the rims, but her posture was straight. She said nothing. We have always trusted quiet more than speeches. I felt the embroidery with my thumb. The thread caught and released. A small metronome I could carry. When the pastor spoke about service, about the kind of strength no one claps for, I thought of stairs swept before dawn and bills paid on the day they were due. I thought of the way Richard would fix a hinge at midnight so it would not wake me in the morning. That is the kind of love that survives inspection. Eliza sat 2 pews away with friends I barely knew. She looked perfect. She looked tired. During the eulogy, she glanced at her phone. The screen kept lighting, a weatherless square that refused to dim. I do not scold adults in churches. I do not scold in public at all. But it pricked. It did. When the hymn began, she sang in a whisper that sounded like an apology no one had written yet. After the benediction, the murmurs turned practical. I heard an uncle ask about probate. A cousin said selling quickly would limit the tax bite. Someone else wondered whether I would keep up with coastal insurance now that premiums had climbed again. Their words had the polite tone people use when they plan around you instead of with you. I held the handkerchief tighter until my knuckles pressed white. Rosa waited by the exit with a tin of lemon bars for the reception. She is the kind of woman who makes grief edible so that people remember to chew. Caleb, the reporter from the local paper, asked if he could take a photograph for the community section. I said he could take a photograph of the flowers. He raised his camera anyway. The lens found me because lenses often do. The picture ran later with a caption about the widow who shelved books for 3 decades. The comments were kind, and also not. Someone wrote that a beachfront sale would be smart before hurricane season. Someone else said widows cling to houses they cannot maintain. I read none of it that day. Rosa did, and deleted the worst before I could see. We carried the casket to the hearse. The handkerchief went with it, and then came back when the door shut. Rosa slipped it into my coat pocket, the way mothers do for children who forget tissues. She does not forget. She stores what others set down. At the reception, I poured coffee and pretended to sip. I answered gentle questions about Richard's last week. I learned which pies come from grief and which from pride. Gwen arrived late in a white coat with sharp shoulders. She made a small bow to me that felt like business. Her eyes measured walls and windows as if square footage could mourn. She said we should talk when things settled. Buyers do not wait. Opportunity keeps its own calendar. I nodded without promising. When the hall emptied, I wiped a water ring from the serving table with the handkerchief. I could not help myself. I folded the square along its old crease. The blue wave faced in. I remembered Richard teaching Eliza to write her name at the dining table. He guided her hand, then let go. When she drew the final line alone, he said, "Good. Now it is yours." I stood very still and wondered when names become signatures and when signatures become knives. Then I went home with the ocean for company and set the handkerchief by the cedar box where Richard kept his letters. Morning would come, whether I slept or not. The tide kept its time. Morning arrived as a thin line of light under the kitchen shade. The ocean kept its slow percussion against the seawall. I boiled water. Cinnamon and butter warmed the air. Rosa was already up, rolling dough with the steady pressure of someone who has fed a family through all kinds of weather. She set the crust in the pan and smiled at me without questions. I laid out plates and cleared a square in the center, where last night's folder lay like a cold instrument. Eliza arrived before the kettle clicked. She did not take off her coat. She did not look at the pie. She opened the folder and spoke in a voice I recognized from her conference calls. Escrow opened. Contingencies waived. Inspection waived, as is. Earnest money non-refundable. Title to record by close of business. She lined the phrases in a row as if they were taming something wild. When she paused for breath, I poured tea into 3 cups. Steam lifted and dissolved like a small rehearsal for mercy. Mom, this is not complicated. Timing matters. The quarter closes Friday. Buyers reward speed. She slid a pen toward me. This clip flashed. I had set the handkerchief over the folder as if to keep the paper from cooling the wood beneath. Thread caught the light. The blue wave held like a quiet answer, waiting its turn. Rosa cut the first slice of pie and pushed it to Eliza. Eat. Hot food tells the truth, she said. Eliza smiled without teeth. She moved the plate aside so it would not touch the paperwork. Calories are not the issue. Exposure is. Coastal premiums climbed. Repairs keep stacking. Liquidity wins. Her words tapped the table like hail. I asked the question I asked last night. Who signed the contract? I kept my voice level. A librarian learns to use tone the way a carpenter uses a square. You hold edges true so the structure does not warp. Eliza glanced toward the back door as if Gwen might appear to steady her. A representative. There is a consortium. This is how adults manage assets, she said. Adults. The word stood there like a judge who never met my hands in the mortar or the long years of returns and renewals that made order out of ordinary life. Rosa replaced the pen with a fork. She set it down where Eliza's fingers would find it first. I made the filling with tart apples. Your father liked it that way, she said. My daughter's chin softened, then settled. She pushed the fork back. We cannot run on sentiment. She turned to me. You do not understand the market. I do. Let me handle this. I thought of all the times I watched children try to keep overdue books an extra week. How some were careless and some were desperate. How the same fine could be a shrug or a sentence. Markets are rooms where someone sets a clock. Mercy is who winds it. I said, Have you eaten? She said she needed to be at the office by 9. Then take a slice in your car, I said. She did not. Eliza tapped the signature line with her pen. Sign here. We will net you $30 after fees. It covers your needs. I will streamline the rest. Not for the first time, I heard the small pronoun that turns mothers into tasks. Needs. As if my life were a closet to be organized. I unfolded the handkerchief and laid it flat over the page. The wave looked like a breath drawn and held. The paper under it cooled. I will read. I will not sign today, I said. I did not raise reasons like fences. I did not list values or memories. I did not mention 10 million, because truth can stand without a number. If you have seen the sunlight enter a room at 4 in the afternoon and know how far it reaches across a floor. Eliza pulled her coat tight and pretended to check her calendar. Do not drag this out, she said. Delay costs. Rosa set a second slice on a small plate and covered it with foil. She placed it into Eliza's hand the way you place a compass in a traveler's palm. "For later," she said. My daughter took it on reflex and then seemed annoyed with herself for accepting. She stood. The chair legs rasped a tired cord across the tile. "I will call you at noon," she said. When the door shut, the kitchen warmed again. I slid the folder into the drawer where we keep the recipe cards. I have always believed important things belong near other important things. The handkerchief went back to my pocket. Rosa washed the knife. The cinnamon cloud thinned. Outside, gulls stooped and corrected themselves in the wind. Even the best flyers adjust rather than break. I sat and tasted the pie. It was tart. It was right. It told the truth, Rosa promised. The table felt less like a courtroom and more like a hearth. Still, the cold square at its center waited for my answer. I carried the folder to the dining room, left it face down, and slid open the door to the deck. Salt climbed the air. The boards were warm from a shy patch of sun. When I breathed that smell, I returned to the first summer of the build, to hands and weather, and the faith of a plan turning into wood and stone. We did not hire a miracle company. We hired people who knew the shoreline by its moods and worked with the tide rather than against it. Richard believed a home should study the wind that will try it. He sketched the elevation on butcher paper and taped it above the fridge. Each morning, we penciled a note on the sketch: roofline higher by 8 inches, window spans narrowed to bear gusts, porch piles sunk where the sand holds. I cooked for the crew because I could not lift beams. I brought coffee before dawn. I carried fruit in a metal bowl that dented the day the crane stuttered. The dent stayed, a small scar I kept to remember patience. The first pour was a sermon. The mixer coughed. The hose bucked. The forms drank the slurry with a glug that sounded like thirst answered. I worked a tamping rod and found pockets where air hid. Richard's hand covered mine as we pressed the bubbles up. "This is how you chase weakness to the surface," he said. "If you leave emptiness buried, it cracks later when you need strength. Marriage is a long pour. You learn where the mix needs water and where too much will ruin the set." Storms trained us. In the second week, a gale snapped 2 sawhorses and sent a stack of house wrap down the beach like white fish. The men ran and pinned the sheets with their bodies and laughed wet through. The architect drove from the city with clean shoes and suggested a different glass. The foreman shook his head and said, "No glass survives if the frame is a rumor." We thickened the frames and added cross-bracing. You cannot see those braces now that the drywall is painted, but I can name their places by heart. When the framing rose, Rosa brought a wooden spoon to the site and tied it near the temporary sink. "Our mothers hang a spoon in a new kitchen," she said. "It keeps arguments small and soup generous." The spoon clicked in the sea wind, and I felt grateful for any charm that would hold a piece. We ate standing up. We drank from jars. We learned which carpenter preferred mustard and which one took sugar. The day the roof went on, Richard walked the ridge with careful feet and whistled to the crew. He threw his hat into the sky. It blew inland and caught on a pine. He said that was a good sign. The house would hold the shore to welcome land. At dusk, we stood inside the skeleton of the living room and watched the tide reach for pilings that did not care. The structure did not flinch. I loved it for that. Sometimes I think Eliza remembers only the finished picture, the staged holidays, the tree glowing, the white slipcovers that stayed white for years. She loved that version. But when she says market, I hear wind. When she says liquidity, I hear the churn that taught us patience. A pretty room is a promise, kept by labor you cannot see. Ease is a lovely necklace that catches the light. It is not a foundation. I closed the door. The deck sighed against the rail with the tide's pull. In my pocket, the handkerchief made a neat corner. The little blue wave waited. I sat at the table and looked at the folder with its tidy claims. A contract has weather of its own. You taste which way it blows. I remembered the tamping rod lifting bubbles to the light. I remembered choosing to press without noise. Strength is built in quiet moments between two knocks of a hammer. I would answer in that same register, steady as the sea that taught us how to build. Thomas arrived just after noon. He parked beneath the crooked pine, carried a scuffed briefcase, and came into my kitchen. He took in the folder on the dining table, the pie plate cooling, the handkerchief folded like a white square of weather. "Do not sign anything today," he said. "Paper moves fast when truth is tired. May I look?" I slid the folder toward him. He did not rush. He read line by line. His finger tracked margins. His mouth twitched when numbers pretended to be facts. "Execution by authorized family representative," he read. "Ambiguous by design. They want your silence to do the work of a signature." He turned a page. Draft deed not recorded. Escrow instructions missing the spousal joinder. Inspection waived without disclosure. This is speed theater. He looked up. Richard once told me winters teach patience. He asked me to help you keep what the wind would try. Rosa poured coffee and set it near his hand. He thanked her by name. "This," he said, tapping the packet, "can be stopped without shouting. Title cannot close cleanly if your interest is more than ceremonial." "What if my interest is invisible?" I asked. "Then we make it visible." He opened his briefcase and pulled a thin folder labeled in his careful block print. "Whitmore Family Trust, 2009. Richard created a revocable trust. He kept the villa inside it with a right of first refusal in favor of a holding company. He called it a storm gate. We need to confirm what was recorded and what still sits in this drawer." I felt the handkerchief warm in my palm. "He did not tell me the names," I said. "He did not need you to carry names. He needed you to carry time." Thomas smiled without pity. "First steps. We will pull the county index and see what sits against the parcel. We will send a demand to escrow for the purchase agreement and the buyer's identity. We will file a notice of interest to cloud title if necessary. Silence is not consent. Silence is a pause we will put to work." Eliza was not there to argue. "She thinks I do not understand markets," I said. "Markets understand leverage," he answered. "Grief gives predators a calendar. We will give them friction. Also, Agnes, do not speak to the realtor alone. If she calls, you say, 'My counsel will respond.' That sentence changes the weather." He read again, slower. "There is a warranty deed template here. Someone prepared it in advance. It names a consortium, but not its members. That is a mask. I prefer faces. I will find them." He set yellow tabs where signatures would hope to sit. "See these blanks? They look small and harmless. They are doors." Rosa set a plate of pie between us. Thomas took a bite and laughed in his chest. "Hot food tells the truth," he said. "All right, 2 more things. 1, Richard asked me to remind you to open the cedar box when you felt the tide slacken. 2, whatever you decide must fit your breath. Court is an option. So is a letter that moves pieces without noise." I asked, "If the trust holds, Can Eliza still sell? Not without you, he said. If title sits in the trust or in tenants by the entirety, your joinder is a pillar. No pillar, no roof. And even if they slip paper past a sleepy clerk, we can set it right before money hardens. We stood at the window a moment and watched gulls argue and then relent. Thomas lifted his hat. I will be back after the clerk's office, he said. Do not worry about being loud. We will be precise. Rosa stood steady beside the sink, listening quietly. Precision felt like oxygen. I folded the handkerchief once more, set the folder in the drawer, and let the ocean keep the beat while Thomas went to fetch names from paper and give them faces. Eliza did not come back after Thomas left. I did not expect her to. I wiped the counter. Rosa put the pie away. The house took a breath. I stepped onto the porch and watched the road. Her sedan idled 2 doors down. She had not driven far. Through the windshield glow, I could see her face lit by a screen. She pinched the bridge of her nose and blew out her cheeks the way she did before spelling tests in 4th grade. The foil packet Rosa handed her lay unopened on the passenger seat. Butter leaves a soft shine even through paper. A courier van slowed and slid an envelope through her half-lowered window. She signed with a pen I gave her for college. The clip is missing. She chewed it in finals week and never replaced it. She opened the envelope. A red stamp flashed. I know overdue when I see it. She stacked it on the console with a notice from the landlord of her office share. There was a bright postcard for a networking brunch and a handwritten note with a clean looped signature that was not her partner's. I did not squint to read it. I am not a thief. She dropped her head to the wheel for a beat. Then she straightened as if a camera had arrived. Her phone lit again. Gwen's name crossed the glass. I could not hear the words, but I recognized sales air in a moving mouth. Eliza's hands moved faster. The phone pressed her cheek. She nodded at nothing. The gesture said certainty. The wrists said strain. She stared at the villa as if looking were a kind of closing. Buyers reward speed, she had said. I watched speed demand oxygen. At the library, I learned how people organize panic. Some stack, some alphabetize. Some throw away the first page as if the second page can begin a different story. Eliza lined envelopes by height. Then she opened her banking app. The blue banner cast her face in cold. She tried 3 times. Once she smiled. Then the smile fell. She swiped again. I could almost hear the small denial chime we once silenced on her phone when she kept trying to purchase a game. She finally opened Rosa's packet. She ate 2 bites. Then she set the slice on the dash where heat would soften it again. She dialed, her jaw set. She said words with edges. When the call ended, she looked older and also younger. That is how fear works. It returns us to the moment we first learned we could lose. Rosa came to the porch with a dish towel over her shoulder. Gwen keeps her nails red, she said. Red nails sell fast. They point without shaking. Gwen sells speed, I said. Speed is a bridge if you know the river, Rosa answered. If you do not, it is a plank. Eliza pulled away and parked in front of a glass box where a mortgage broker rents space. I watched her walk inside, coat unbuttoned, hair pinned too tight. After a while, she came out. Gwen met her on the sidewalk and talked with hands. She traced rectangles in the air, the way agents do when they measure rooms you cannot see. Eliza nodded. She signed a form against the hood. Gwen pointed toward the horizon as if showing tide charts, then pointed back at my door. They did not wave. I do not excuse what my daughter is doing. I also do not pretend I do not understand gravity. She was raised in neat rooms where the fridge filled on schedule. She liked gold stars on charts and the praise that follows performance. When adult rooms began to grade on curves, she started borrowing tomorrows from tomorrow. Interest gathers its own friends. The dish towel slowed under Rosa's hand. She said nothing. We watched Eliza answer a call and turn away for privacy. She whispered into her sleeve. I caught one phrase through the wind. Power of attorney. It landed like a pebble on a dock. Small sound. Steady ripples. She listened. She looked back at the villa. She nodded. I chose not to walk down the steps and interrupt. Some choices must be recorded without witnesses, so the person who makes them can hear their own name clearly. Eliza drove off toward the bridge. The foil sagged on the dash. Cinnamon shimmered in the low sun. Rosa took my arm. We went inside. Thomas would call from the clerk's office. The day would fold into the long evening I already felt coming. I closed the door. I let the lock catch with its clean click. The ocean lifted and set. Shadows pooled in the hallway like cool water. I touched the handkerchief in my pocket and reminded my breath that it could count slow without drowning. Night settled like a slow tide. The rooms held. The pantry radio issued a surf advisory. A measured voice listed swells and cautions near jetties. Rosa turned the dial lower and tucked a blanket over the couch arm before she went upstairs. I said I would sleep. We both knew I would listen. In sink, a cup waited for hot water. Cinnamon lingered. Grief is noisy in daylight. At night, it trades clatter for breath and asks what you will do next. I brewed chamomile and carried the cup to the east window. The ocean wore a dark coat. Seams stitched the water where waves shouldered each other. The villa hummed when the wind leaned into its ribs. The hum was not fear. It was the sound of a frame remembering its lessons. I pressed the folded handkerchief to the rim, so steam softened the cotton. The blue thread gleamed, then calmed. I thought of Richard's hands setting nails flush. He taught wood to keep its promises. I considered calling Eliza. The wish came immediate. A mother hears trouble from distances charts cannot measure. I pictured her on the bridge, then at her desk, papers fanned, phone lit, jaw set. I imagined the words I could carry. Come home. Eat the slice. Sleep. We will go to the clerk in the morning. Then I pictured Gwen in her white coat, counting minutes like coins. I set my phone face down and let the room return to salt and wind. I opened the drawer where I keep lists and wrote 3 headings in my library hand. What I know, what I do not know, what I will not do. Under the first, Richard planned for storms. Thomas sees holes in their paper. The house is sound. Under the second, buyer identity. Whether power of attorney exists. Whether title left the trust. Under the third, I will not sign under pressure. I will not shout. I will not be hurried by other people's calendars. I thought of all the screws I have tightened. Small repairs keep families from tearing. I taught that in quiet ways that never needed a speech. Replace the bulb. Refill the soap. Renew the card before the fine erodes options. In the library, children learned a book returns to its shelf with neighbors. Order is kindness made practical. The wind climbed the shingles and rattled a gutter. A loose screw confessed. Honest. The tea cooled and surrendered its steam. I let it, and the room steadied. I let the night become a hall of doors and walked it in my mind. Behind one door, I signed and slept. The conflict would grow quiet for a week, then grind somewhere else. Behind a second, I fought in court and won at a cost my breath could not afford. Behind a third, I waited, gathered names, and placed my question where signatures must answer. Who signed the contract? The sentence held like a handrail in rough water and steadied the pull of fear. Near midnight, I opened the cedar box and breathed sap. The envelope with Richard's hand lay where he left it. I closed the lid again. Thomas had asked me to wait until the tide slackened. I was stubborn when a man I loved asked me to practice patience. I set the box back and wiped my thumb on the handkerchief. Cedar leaves a whisper of gold on skin. The house exhaled as a set arrived. The porch flag snapped a salute to wind. I moved through each room and put my palm to a wall like a nurse touching a wrist. My breath matched the rhythm, in for 5, out for 6. I learned that beside hospital machines. Near 2, I sat at the dining table, turned the folder so its spine faced me, and listened to rain begin. I thought of Eliza at 7 and at 38. I measured the space between in stacked choices. Tonight, I chose waiting. I slept without signing. The weather folder fit in my tote like a quiet tool. I took it, and the handkerchief, to the county complex after lunch. The records building smelled like toner. The air ran cold to keep memory from warping. A greeter pointed me to public records. I pressed the elevator button with my knuckle the way nurses taught me in waiting rooms. In the search room, long tables held terminals that blinked a patient blue. A clerk in a dust-colored sweater asked if I needed help. I told her I wanted the chain of title for a beachfront parcel on Shoreline Road. I gave her the parcel number from the tax bill I have paid on time for 23 years. Her badge read, Margot. Peppermint followed her when she logged me in. I typed slowly. Librarians never rush text. The index rose like a stacked tide. Deeds, liens, certificates, releases. I opened the warranty deed from 8 years ago when Richard moved the property into the trust. His signature sat steady, the ink slightly bluer than the body text. Next came a memorandum of right of first refusal. Grantee listed as Seabright Holdings, a Delaware company. The recording stamp in the corner looked like a small blessing. Date certain, time certain, book and page. Margot rolled a ladder to a high shelf and brought down a flat file of parcel maps. We slid the sheet for our section onto the table. The paper crackled. Lot 18 sat like a narrow palm against the dune. Handwritten notes identified flood elevation and the year our pilings were certified. I traced the shape with a fingertip and felt foolish for the thrill that rose. A map is a story that admits its scale. "Do you want the flood zone overlay?" she asked. I nodded. The overlay showed our house, in a higher V zone than the street behind. The elevation certificate number matched the one in the weather folder. Richard had written check this every 5 years in the margin. I made a note on my pad. I asked about any current transfers. Margot shook her head. Nothing recorded since the last tax payment. Sometimes they try to rush paper through. The stampers leave at 4:30. People forget that, she said, and smiled like a person who remembers office hours. At the cashier window, I paid for certified copies. The stamp thumped the page with a tidy rhythm. The clerk slid the bundle to me and said, "Do not leave these in a hot car. Seals soften." I tucked the packet next to the Seabright summary. The handkerchief rode on top and kept the edges from catching. On the way home, I stopped at our insurance agent's storefront. The bell on the door rang like a teaspoon on china. Tom has known our policy longer than Eliza has known spreadsheets. He printed the declarations page and laid it flat. Replacement cost, dwelling A, 10 million, he said. His finger followed the line like a guide. You and Richard increased limits after the last renovation. Construction costs never went back down. Numbers do not scare me. They tell truths different from stories, yet they answer if you ask kindly. I looked at the coverage, the windstorm rider, the note that the roof meets the newest code. 10 million is not a fantasy. It is a practical measure of how much labor would be required to restore what our hands already built. Back at the house, I spread the copies on the dining table and weighted the corners. The chain of title read like a hymn with repeating lines. The right of first refusal sat where a refrain belongs. I wrote in my notebook, buyer must clear this, escrow must honor this. Then I placed the handkerchief over the stack and listened for the ocean that never forgets its way back to shore. It sounded like paper settling after a stamp. It sounded like a house remembering its name again. Gwen's office sat in a strip plaza behind a nail salon and a yoga studio. Ficus plants and citrus cleaner scented the air. The receptionist smiled. I gave my name. Gwen appeared in a white coat with black piping, the pose of a surgeon borrowed for sales. She led me to a conference nook, where the table looked like a chessboard. Red candies sat in the center. Agnes. I am glad you came, she said, stacking folders. We have momentum. The quarter closes Friday. My buyer appreciates decisiveness. The sooner we finalize, the more favorable the terms. I have a document that simplifies everything. She slid a short form across the board and set a heavy pen beside it. The title read, Spousal Acknowledgement. I did not touch the pen. I placed my handkerchief on the form the way a person sets a teacup on a coaster, polite and firm. The little blue wave faced her like an eye. Before we proceed, I said, Who is the buyer? A consortium, she said, with a smile that promised luxury. Monarch Capital. Institutional. They move quickly. A non-refundable deposit is in place. Inspection waived. It tells me they are in a hurry. I said, Names, please. Humans buy houses. What are their names? She clicked her pen twice. A metronome for control. My fiduciary duty runs to my client. Your daughter retained me. The less you worry about mechanics, the better. What matters is that you will be comfortable. $30,000 covers your needs. Eliza will handle the rest. The house knows its owner, I said softly. Tell me who signed the contract. Gwen leaned back and crossed one leg. We do not need to revisit process. We need signatures. Every day you delay risks goodwill. Markets punish hesitation. I have already held back another party who will top this offer by adding contingencies. That is not in your interest. I looked at the chessboard table. In libraries, I taught children that pawns matter because they occupy ground. I slid the form back toward her with my fingertips, the handkerchief still covering its face. Who is Monarch Capital? I asked. What state are they organized in? What address is on their incorporation papers? Are they the ones who signed, or is there an agent of record? Her smile thinned. Delaware. Of course. The signature page is held in escrow as is customary. Your daughter is authorized to move family assets efficiently. She explained that you prefer not to engage with dense documents. I prefer to engage with names, I said, and with the right of first refusal recorded in favor of Seabright Holdings. Any buyer must clear that gate. She blinked. Those old provisions often wash out in practice. Sophisticated parties do not let technicalities derail transactions. Gates are not technicalities, I said. They prevent floods. Gwen reached for another folder. I would hate to involve attorneys for something so simple, she said. Attorneys slow everything and eat fees. Thomas Reed is already involved, I said. He reads quickly and bills slowly. She set the folder down. If you insist on lawyering this, my client will withdraw the goodwill credit and remove the courtesy of covering certain costs. Comfort has never been a line on a net sheet, I said. Comfort is being able to sleep with the windows open in a storm. She pushed the bowl of candies an inch toward me, then pulled it back, a small gambit. I stood. Send the purchase agreement and buyer's identity to Mr. Reed. Send the escrow instructions too. Until then, the house remains as it is. Gwen walked me to the door with a smile that had lost a degree of shine. Delay is a decision, she said. So is clarity, I answered, and tucked the handkerchief into my pocket. Outside, traffic made a soft river sound. Gulls worked the parking lot for crumbs. The ocean was not visible, but the horizon stayed steady enough to find without looking. By the time I reached home from Gwen's office, a sedan idled at the curb, and a man stepped out with a reporter's notebook. Caleb Shore lifted a hand as if hailing a taxi. His tie was slightly crooked. His shoes carried salt dust from the sidewalk. He apologized for the interruption. He said the community cared about heritage properties. He asked if I would speak on the record about a sale rumored to be closing during the week of mourning. I kept the gate between us. The latch felt cool and honest. I said I preferred quiet. I said any questions should go to my counsel. He nodded as if that sentence were a door closing softly. He handed me a card anyway. The card was thin and sincere. He glanced past me toward the dune grass and the weathered siding that Richard had insisted we oil by hand. He said people felt attached to this stretch of coast because memories settled here, like sand. They wanted reassurance that the house would not be flipped into something loud. I said the ocean allowed few loud things for long. He smiled. He wrote that down. He asked whether I could confirm an agent name or buyer identity. I said, "Who signed the contract?" He looked up. The wind moved his hair. He seemed to understand that my question was also my answer. Rosa appeared with a small paper bag. She slid it through the gate. "Lemon bars for your walk," she said. Caleb thanked her. He asked if he could take a photograph from the street for context. I said yes from the street. No faces. He obeyed. The camera clicked once. He stepped back to keep the dune grass in frame. He said he would file a story for tomorrow's morning edition. He said it would be fair. I said fairness and kindness are cousins. He said he would try for both. By late afternoon, the online version posted. Rosa read it on her phone at the sink. The headline used careful words. The subhead used faster ones. There was an old funeral photo the paper already owned. It showed me at the church door. It showed the handkerchief in my hand. It showed a woman who looks like she is counting waves. The comments bloomed and then tangled. Some praised stewardship. Some scolded sentiment. One suggested I was blocking progress for selfish reasons. Another suggested my daughter was being practical. Rosa set the phone face down and said the internet is a room without a hush sign. Caleb texted to ask if I wanted to add anything before the print run. I answered with one sentence. My counsel will respond. He replied with a thank you and a promise to file a public records request at the clerk's office. He told me he would ask the county for any recent filings on our parcel and any escrow instructions that might be releasable. He said these things take days. He said patience is built into the process. I said that sounded like coastal code. At dusk, Thomas called from the courthouse steps. He had filed a demand for the purchase agreement and the buyer identity. He had requested the escrow number. He had left a voicemail for Gwen that used the words statutory notice and right of first refusal. He sounded like a man reading the tide chart aloud, so a small boat could choose its hour. He told me to sleep if I could. He told me good paper can stand the night. Neighbors texted casserole offers and questions wrapped in comfort words. I answered with gratitude and weather. The ocean lifted and set. Gulls argued about nothing important and then forgot. The house held its hum. An email arrived from an escrow address with a subject line that used the word courtesy and a deadline printed in bold. It asked for a spousal acknowledgement. It promised convenience. I laid the handkerchief across the screen and let the blue wave cool the urgency. The light faded behind the fabric until the message became only light again. When I turned off the porch lamp, the glass kept a little of the day. It gave it back to the dark in a measured way. I set Caleb's card beside the cedar box and listened to the clock. Tomorrow would bring paper and perhaps more pictures. Tonight brought breath. I counted it like small coins saved in a jar for a thing that matters. I waited until the house stilled. Then I carried the cedar box to the table. The grain smelled like summer in the garage when Richard sanded window trim and whistled. I set the handkerchief beside the lid. The blue wave felt like a small lantern I could light. The envelope lay where it had always waited. His handwriting angled right, patient and neat, the kind of script that trusts itself. Agnes, it began. If this letter reaches your hands, I could not stand where I promised to stand. Do not let that absence speak louder than what we built. The ocean teaches. The quiet water is the strongest. It moves sand. Do not let anyone treat your silence as surrender. Hold it like a tool. He wrote about the villa the way he used to say grace. Even, grateful, specific. This house is pledged to your breath first. The deed passes through a trust I funded, so storms would meet more than nails. Seabright Holdings holds a right of first refusal. You hold Seabright. Thomas knows where papers live. He will open doors if someone closes them. He listed names, bank officers, a title clerk who owed him a favor because Richard found a mistake others missed. He recorded numbers, parcel, policy, account. He wrote them twice and underlined once. He explained in language that any sale must cross the gate we placed long ago. The gate is not ceremonial. It is weight-bearing. If anyone rushes you, slow them. If anyone praises speed, ask which screw they left loose to save a minute. Then he said what I needed most. I did not make this house alone. You held ladders and budgets. You kept daylight honest. You know value by touch. That is rarer than a spreadsheet. If Eliza forgets it, forgive her slowly. Do not excuse her. Do not humiliate her. Teach the tide its name and let it do the heavy lifting. He wrote about Rosa with a fondness that warmed the page. Listen when Rosa speaks from her pocket map of goodness. She knows where keys belong. He wrote about Thomas. He is stubborn for the right things. He will not let you trade air for paper. He closed with the sentence Rosa had already put in my ear. Do not let silence be underestimated. Let it be the room where others hear their footsteps clearly. Then, a final instruction, not theatrical, completely practical. Place the handkerchief on any page you are asked to sign. It will remind you that you decline until the tide is right. I read the letter twice. Then I set it on the cedar as if it were a small beam resting on true stone. I felt the room measure itself around me. The windows counted wind. I did not cry. My body made the decision before my mind could sentimentalize. I folded the handkerchief. I stood. I put the letter back in its sleeve and left the box open so the room could breathe cedar. Caleb's card sat by the lamp. Gwen's courtesy email slept in my inbox. Eliza's pen had drawn a thin shine across the wood where it tapped. I thought of the 3 lists I made last night. What I know, what I do not know, what I will not do. The letter moved a line from one list to another. That was enough for a morning. I texted Thomas a single sentence. I have Seabright and the trust language. Proceed. He replied with a time to meet and a promise to deliver a formal notice to escrow before lunch. Rosa brought coffee and said nothing. Her silence felt like a wall that bears weight without cracking. The ocean lifted. The house answered with its honest hum. I did not feel brave. I felt aligned. When the doorbell rang a minute later, I folded the handkerchief across my palm like a white anchor and went to see who had come to test the gate. Thomas stood on the step with his hat in his hand. He said the clerk had confirmed the index entries I already found. He said the sooner we visited the bank, the cleaner our trail. I slipped the handkerchief into my pocket and locked the door behind us. The morning had the bite of clean paper. Gulls worked the median like critics. We sat across from the branch manager in a glass office that made everyone visible. Her nameplate read, Diane Co. Thomas spoke first. He requested the trust file, the account statements, and any correspondence related to Seabright Holdings. He placed his card and the letter of authorization on the table. The letter bore Richard's spare signature and my own. Diane read with care. Then she looked at me rather than through me. Mrs. Whitmore, I remember the day you and your husband increased the dwelling coverage, she said. He brought a folder of contractor invoices and said a house should be insured to the labor, not the paint. She smiled once. The memory seemed to oblige her to be thorough. Let me pull the records. She returned with a binder and a slim blue file. The binder contained the trust's operating account, deposits, routine transfers for taxes and repairs, the quiet housekeeping of a property kept in good order. The blue file carried the Seabright papers, a certificate of formation from Delaware, an EIN letter, a banking resolution naming me as managing member, a right of first refusal notice acknowledged by the bank 2 years after the renovation. This is current, no amendments on file, no additional signers, no powers of attorney recorded here, she said. Thomas asked about any recent inquiries. Diane checked her log. There was a balance verification request yesterday from a title company, she said. It referenced an escrow number. I declined absent a subpoena or written consent from you. She turned the monitor toward us to show the entry. The title company was the one Gwen uses. The timestamp matched the hour Eliza sat in her car across from our house and chewed the pen I bought her for college. May we have certified copies of the governance documents? Thomas asked. Diane nodded. Of course. She pressed a key that summoned a printer. The machine worked like a small storm, gathering and stapling, then resting. She stamped the copies in a rhythm that soothed me. Dates became anchors. I asked about the right of first refusal. If a sale is attempted, do I need to act before closing? I said. Or does the recorded notice require escrow to present terms to Seabright first? The notice requires presentation, she said. Escrow should deliver the purchase agreement to Seabright. The clock starts when you receive it. You have the period stated in the memo to match or decline. If they try to record without honoring the notice, we can freeze the related disbursement if it passes through accounts we service. She paused. I am not your attorney. I am your banker. But I can make phone calls that convince people to reread documents. I thanked her. The handkerchief warmed against my palm like a small vote. Thomas asked whether any powers of attorney were ever filed. Diane checked again. No, she said. Your husband never delegated signature authority. He said you were the one he trusted to say no. We left with 2 crisp packets and Diane's card. In the lobby, a child at the coin machine poured a jar of quarters into the tray. The counter flashed numbers and sang a tiny chime. I thought about value measured by weight and by sound. Some truths announce themselves that way. Outside, the wind lifted and set. Thomas would send the bank copies to escrow with formal notice, and one line. The gate is closed until Seabright decides. He offered me a ride. I chose to walk by the water. He drove to the courthouse. I turned toward the shore at dusk. Rain began as I reached the boardwalk, a soft percussion on the railings that matched the pulse in my wrist. I hung my coat. I set the bank packets on the table. I pressed the handkerchief flat, as if smoothing a chart before a night crossing. Eliza stood there with rain shining on her lashes. Gwen's car idled at the curb like a punctuation mark. My daughter held a plastic sleeve. Droplets raced down the slick surface and gathered at the edge. The paper inside was trimmed to look official. A yellow tab pointed toward a line where my name waited. Here's the final set. Sign and I can wire tonight. The lender is ready. The buyer is insisting on clean title. We cannot let this slip into next week. Her voice was a metronome, set a beat too fast now. I turned the sleeve. I read the caption. Spousal joinder and consent. The words wanted to sound like courtesy. They read like surrender. I set the kettle back on the flame. The blue ring steadied me. Rosa pulled 2 cups and then 3. She placed them without noise. Eliza tapped the yellow tab. Mom, please. You know I am drowning. This fixes it. 30 covers you. No more repairs. No more storms. I will take care of everything. Her eyes were bright, not with tears, with voltage. She had a plan that fed on signatures. I asked one question, the only one I could ask without spilling the whole sea. Who signed the contract? She flinched a fraction. She recovered. The agent of record signed. The consortium signs at closing. This is standard. The words standard and closing tried to stand between us like strong men. The kettle clicked. I poured water. Steam lifted and made a small weather over the table. I set a cup in front of her. She did not touch it. I lifted the sleeve and slid the handkerchief beneath. The blue wave pressed through the translucent plastic. The signature line turned faintly blue. My hands felt steady in a way that had nothing to do with steel. Eliza pulled out a second page. It was a limited power of attorney. Her finger underlined the clause that would let her sign for me in case of emergency. She said, "This is only to keep things from falling apart if you are unavailable. I can fix logistics." Her smile was the kind people wear at the edge of a cliff when they swear they can fly. I read the clause. I set it down. I did not push or scold. I lifted my cup. The tea was hot and plain. I said, "I will not sign tonight." The words did not rise. They settled. Rosa stood in the doorway with a towel. Rain threaded the window behind her. Eliza's face changed shapes. Daughter, seller, child, stranger. She leaned forward. "If you do not sign, I will lose the deposit. My credit is gone. The office will evict me. The car is 2 payments behind. They will take it. I will have nothing left to trade." She looked at me as if I were a bank that owed her a rescue. I folded the handkerchief over the line and smoothed it as if tucking in a child. I said, "This house is pledged to my breath first. If there is a buyer, they will present themselves to Seabright. We will consider. We will answer when the tide is right. I will not sign under rain." Gwen honked. A short, impatient note. Eliza gathered the sleeve. She left the cup untouched. At the door, she paused. She whispered, "I thought you would choose me." I said, "I am choosing the ground that keeps us from drowning." She went into the wet light. The porch absorbed the shake of her steps. The ocean kept its low drum. I washed the cup she did not use. I dried it. I set it back where it belongs. Thomas returned in the last light with rain on his hat brim and a red folder tucked under his arm. He set it on the dining table the way a surveyor sets a stake. Rosa brought towels. He declined the big one and used the small, the kind of man who hates to waste fabric. He glanced at the handkerchief. He nodded once, as if it were a flag that told him where true north lay. "I have pieces," he said. "Now they fit." He opened the folder. On top sat an email from escrow, stamped received at 3:27. Beneath it, the purchase agreement. Beneath that, a short writer signed 15 minutes later by the same officer who answered Diane's verification request. He laid each page carefully, left to right, so the chain read like a sentence. "The agreement names Monarch Capital or assigns as buyer," he said. That was Gwen's speed trick. A moving target makes people tired. When our notice of right of first refusal hit their inbox, escrow did what competent people do. They read. The rider they added is called a compliance rider. It identifies the assignee who must stand in front of the gate so terms can be offered properly. Read this line. He tapped with a pencil. Assignee for tender under recorded memorandum of right of first refusal. Seabright Holdings, LLC. He let the room hear it before he lifted his eyes. I felt the table steady, the way a dock stops wobbling when someone plants their feet. "So the buyer in their own paperwork is Seabright," I said. "Now it is," he answered. They had no choice once the memo surfaced from the index and smacked the desk. Here is where it turns from nuisance to leverage. He slid a certified copy from the blue bank packet beside the rider. The names matched both lines. The stamp ink bled a little into the grain and looked like it had roots. He flipped to a thin stack clipped behind. I also pulled Delaware this afternoon. The agent of record stamped your certificate of formation 13 years ago. There are no amendments. The managing member is Whitmore Family Trust. The trustee is you. No other members, no silent partners, no hidden hands. He pushed a page toward me with the silver emboss raised like a calm thumbprint. You are the buyer they have to serve. You are the gate and the road beyond it. Outside, the gutters ticked. Rosa stood quiet as a beam. I traced the seal with a forefinger. Paper holds warmth longer than people think. "What happens now?" I asked. "Two paths," he said, setting the pencil across the top like a small bridge. "One, we decline and force them back to market at a number that acknowledges the house as labor rather than paint. Two, we match and close to yourself at their valuation. You take title through Seabright. The storm ends with a deed in your drawer and a lesson filed where it belongs. Both are lawful. Both are clean. One heals by saying no. The other heals by saying yes on your terms." He turned the purchase agreement so the figures faced me. They priced the soul at 30 for you and a tidy remainder into Eliza's columns after fees no one signed up to explain. If we chose the yes, We would bring cashier funds from Seabright for the contract price, record in one morning, and watch the speed sellers learn what real speed looks like when it serves a house rather than a commission. I breathed. The little blue wave on the handkerchief looked less like thread and more like instruction. Eliza wanted the money yesterday, I said. She believes speed is love. Speed is often fear with a haircut, Thomas said. Love is accuracy. He gathered the stack and squared the corners. I will serve a formal tender letter at 9. It will put them on a clock they did not set. Gwen will call. She will warn. She will charm. Let me answer. When Eliza calls, you can tell her truth without volume. The gate is honored, and the buyer of record is Seabright. You can also tell her a mother does not drown her child to save a boat. Rosa exhaled softly. The house answered with its honest hum. I touched the seal again and thought of concrete cures. Strength arrives if you keep the timing. We will take the path that keeps breath, I said. Write the letter. Keep the clock. Before dawn, I walked to the shoreline. The night had loosened, but the day had not yet taken its weight. The sand held cold. The tide dragged a hem of white along the lip of the beach. I carried the handkerchief in my pocket and let my fingers rest on the stitched wave. I wanted the sea to teach me again. Breathing to surf is not romance. It is attention. In for 5. Out for 6. Count until your heart remembers it can be steady inside weather that is not. Richard used to put his palm beneath our daughter's ribs and whisper the numbers. He would say, "The ocean will carry you if you stop thrashing." Eliza learned to float in water rougher than most community pools would allow. Gulls heckled. My towel gathered sand like a dutiful witness. When she panicked, he did not yank her to shore. He widened his stance and kept counting. Her body listened before her mind believed. That is how courage often arrives. I walked close to where the foam thinned and slid back. The beach tilted a little under my feet, the way decisions tilt when you are almost ready to make them. Thomas had given me 2 clean paths. Saying no would return the house to open sky without new paper. Saying yes would place the deed inside Seabright, where storms could knock and meet a gate. Either path required breath. I counted again. A fisherman passed with a 5-gallon bucket and a red cap. He lifted 2 fingers in the greeting men keep. For mornings that start honest. He said, "Rough set. Better by noon." I said, "Better by noon will do." He nodded and kept along the wet line. His boots left prints that the next wave softened without erasing. I have lived long enough to prefer softening to erasure. I thought about what it means to mother a grown child. The work changes containers, but not weight. When Eliza was small, my no protected stairs and sockets. Now my no must protect time and consequences. People call it tough love as if firmness were violent. I call it accurate love. I call it the measured hand under the ribs while the water teaches. Accuracy is kindness with a spine. A pelican glided low. Its wings skimmed the trough between swells like a ruler testing straightness. I pictured the meeting that would turn our living room into a board table. I pictured Gwen's careful smile and Thomas's quiet pencil. I pictured Eliza avoiding the east window because the horizon tells the truth about lines. I rehearsed the sentence I would use. I would ask, who signed the contract? Then I would wait. I would let silence do what it does when people have to hear themselves justify their speed. The sky brightened behind a sheet of gray that did not move. Light soaked the clouds without breaking them. I took off my shoes and let the water reach my ankles. Cold argued with bone. and then agreed to share. Richard used to say that the ocean is a patient teacher. It repeats until the body understands. I stayed until the count felt like prayer. Then I put my shoes back on and turned for home. On the path through the dune grass, I found a piece of driftwood shaped like a small brace. I carried it because some days you need to hold a metaphor to remember the point. At the porch, I brushed sand from my hem and from the driftwood's grain. I set it on the sill beside the cedar box so that wood could speak to wood. The house answered with its hum. The kettle agreed. Rosa called from the stairs that Thomas had sent a message. 9 o'clock was confirmed. I dried my feet with the handkerchief and smiled at silliness. It is not built for that, yet it held. Breath steady, tides constant, the gate ready, my question set for morning. By 9, the living room looked like a boardroom. I set a long farm table, parallel to the east window, chairs on both sides, water glasses, a yellow pad for minutes. Rosa placed a plate of lemon bars in the center and retreated to the doorway, like a quiet sergeant at arms. The cedar box sat on the sideboard. The piece of driftwood I found at dawn rested across it like a brace. I kept the handkerchief folded on my pad, the blue wave facing up. Thomas arrived first. He laid a neat stack of letters and a single sheet labeled Agenda. He spoke in the tone of a tide chart. Purpose. 1. Acknowledge the recorded right of first refusal. 2. Identify the buyer required to tender. 3. Set today's decision path. He clicked his pencil and wrote the time in the margin. He is a man who believes meetings belong to clocks, not egos. Gwen swept in wearing the white coat and a smile set to bright. Eliza came behind her, hair pinned too, tight, eyes the color of a late storm. Gwen placed a folder on the table and announced herself as agent of record. We appreciate the courtesy of hosting, she said, but we do need to respect deadlines. Markets punish hesitation. Thomas slid a letter across the table. At 9:01, I served tender notice pursuant to the recorded memorandum, he said. Escrow acknowledged receipt. The compliance writer filed last evening names the assignee required to present terms. Seabright Holdings. We request the full purchase agreement and any amendments for evaluation. Gwen tried to keep the smile. It faltered. Tender is premature, she said. My client intends to proceed to closing. We simply need Mrs. Whitmore's spousal acknowledgement and, if she prefers, a limited power of attorney for convenience. I placed the handkerchief on the acknowledgement form so the blue thread covered the signature line. Who signed the contract? I asked. Eliza's fingers tightened on her folder. Mom, the agent signed for a consortium. This is standard. Please do not turn this into theater. We can still wire today. Thomas tapped the writer with his pencil. The writer made it simple. The buyer required to face the gate is Seabright. You are seated at its table. We are not performing. We are reading. Gwen flipped to a page and pointed with her pen. Language here authorizes representatives. Speed is essential. If you involve attorneys further, the goodwill credits will evaporate. Speed is often fear with a haircut, Thomas said. We will accept written names now. I nodded to Rosa. She brought the phone and pressed speaker. Diane Coe, she said, and the banker's voice filled the room as clean as a bell. She confirmed the trust accounts, the Seabright governance, and the lack of any recorded power of attorney. If escrow attempts to disburse without honoring the recorded notice, she said, we will freeze related transfers that pass through our bank pending clarification. Gwen looked at Eliza. This is unnecessary pressure. Pressure is asking a widow to sign away a deed in rain, I said. Pressure is calling urgency kindness. The house is pledged to my breath first. We will treat it accordingly. Eliza stared at the window instead of the documents. I am trying to fix things, she said. 30 covers you. I will handle the rest. 30 is a stranger's number for a life he did not sweep, I answered. Today we will decide between two lawful paths. We decline and you return to market at an honest price. Or we match and close to Seabright, and the house remains in the gate we built for storms. Both protect breath. We will choose by noon. Thomas set a blank on the table, titled Minutes, and wrote the words, Decision by 12. Gwen reopened her folder and slid the agreement across. The numbers looked tidy and untrue. She began to speak about contingencies, about quarter ends, about momentum. I let her words run out against my silence. The handkerchief stayed on the line. Rosa's clock ticked like a metronome teaching a class to count. I turned to Eliza. If you have names to add them now. If you have an apology, speak it when you mean it. We are not at war. We are at a table. She did not answer. The ocean lifted beyond the glass and set again with its honest hum. Thomas recorded the hour. Documents received. Buyer identified. Tender acknowledged, he read. We reconvene at 11:45 for the decision. He looked to me. I nodded. The meeting adjourned to the sound of the sea measuring the walls and finding them true. We reconvened at 11:45. The light shifted. The ocean turned flat silver. Thomas reset the agenda in one sentence. Buyer identified. Tender acknowledged. Decision pending. He slid the purchase agreement toward Gwen and waited. I kept the handkerchief on the signature line. I turned to Eliza. I asked the question that has become my spine. Who signed the contract? I kept my voice quiet so the words carried their own weight. She opened her folder and searched for a shield. There's an agent authorization, she said. The consortium empowered a signatory. Everyone does it this way. Names, I said. Children hide behind plurals. Who is the human who put ink to this? Gwen stepped in with practiced brightness. The executing officer is a representative of Monarch Capital. Her title is Acquisitions Manager. There is no need to personalize a routine transaction. We are all professionals here. Thomas did not smile. He placed a blank pad in the center and set a pen on top. Write her name and the address of record, he said. If the sale is standard, it will match public filings. Gwen did not touch the pen. She said the name quickly, as if speed could keep it from staining the air. Madison K. Leary, care of Monarch Capital, Wilmington. Thomas wrote it slowly and underlined once. Thank you. Now the second signature. The writer when escrow acknowledged the right of first refusal. He already knew. He asked so, the room could hear itself. Gwen's smile wavered. The writer was executed by the assignee of record, she said. Seabright Holdings. By whom? I asked. Gwen stared at the window. By its managing member. Thomas tapped the page. State it for the minutes. She cleared her throat. Agnes Whitmore, trustee of the Whitmore Family Trust. Silence moved through the room. Eliza blinked as if a flash had gone off. She looked at the paper as though it had changed languages. I let the weight fall where it belonged. The house is pledged to my breath first, I thought. The paper finally remembered. Eliza whispered, You are the buyer. It was not accusation. It was a child naming a fact she should have known sooner. I answered in the only way that kept us on shore. I am the gate. The rider required the buyer to face me. Your contract had to climb the stairs and ring this bell. It did. Gwen reached for momentum. Then let us approve the spousal acknowledgement and proceed to closing. You can wear both hats, seller and buyer. Everyone wins on schedule. Thomas shook his head. Not without terms that tell the truth. Either Agnes declines and you return to market with honest numbers, or Seabright matches and closes at a price that respects replacement cost and the recorded protections. The spousal form is not a courtesy. It is a pillar. Eliza tried again. Her voice cracked, then steadied. Mom, please. I am out over my head. I took loans for a launch that did not launch. If this falls apart, I will be sued. I will have nothing left to bargain with. Please sign. I wanted to put my hand under her ribs the way Richard did in the surf. I also wanted my silence to do its work. I folded the handkerchief and set it in the center of the table. I said, I will not sign a form that pretends breath is a checkbox. I will offer one decision now. We match and close to Seabright today. The deed stays protected. You receive a clean accounting consistent with law. We speak about the rest when everyone is dry. Or we decline, and you negotiate in daylight at a number that belongs to... Gwen looked at the clock. Schedules failed her. Thomas wrote pause on the minutes and drew a line. The ocean lifted. The room held. My question had been answered for the record. Now the day could move forward for us all. Thomas uncapped his pen and set 2 envelopes on the table. One bore Diane's stamp and the weight of a cashier's check. The other carried his letterhead and the word tender typed in a line that did not tremble. He looked to me, not past me. You choose the current, he said. I placed the handkerchief beside the envelopes so the blue wave faced forward. My breath counted the way Richard taught. In for 5, out for 6. Steady inside weather that tries to hurry you. I choose to match and close to Seabright, I said. We end the storm with a deed in a drawer I can reach. Thomas slid the tender across the board. Then we turn their speed, he said, and read aloud for the record. Seabright Holdings exercises its recorded right of first refusal. Enclosed find funds equal to the deposit. Seabright will meet all material terms, less any unlawful waivers. Escrow is instructed to substitute buyer of record accordingly. Closing to occur on the earliest lawful date. He tapped the line that mattered. Spousal consent is not required where the buyer is the protected holder of the gate. Gwen leaned in, as if proximity could blur print. This is irregular, she said. You are manufacturing friction. This is recorded law reading itself out loud, Thomas answered. The only irregularity was asking a widow to sign in the rain. Eliza stared at the cashier's check like light hurts. So the house transfers to your company, she said, voice low. You keep it, and I get 30. I turned the handkerchief once, slow, as if smoothing a child's hair. No, I said. You will receive a clean accounting after liens and taxes. You will also receive a letter from me, not as a buyer, as your mother. It will offer help that tells the truth. Gwen tried another square on her board. If Seabright buys at this number, my client still expects fees. Thomas nodded as if she had recited weather. Escrow will pay any fee the contract lawfully allows, he said. But note the rider restores disclosures your form waived. We will not buy blind. Inspection will occur before close. Anything serious adjusts price. Gwen opened her mouth, closed it, found a smile she did not trust. You will tank your own deal with demands. Thomas clicked the pen. Accuracy is not a demand, he said. It is oxygen. I faced Eliza. After closing, I said, Seabright will extend you a structured loan at family terms to retire the highest interest debts. You will sign for it, not as my daughter, as an adult. You will meet with a counselor at the credit union who will teach you a budget you respect. I will not sign where you should learn. She blinked hard. You are buying the house to rescue me. I am buying the house because your father and I built a gate for storms, I answered. I am offering a rope because I remember the count under your ribs when the water lifted you. This is not indulgence. This is accurate love. Rosa set the phone between us and dialed speaker for escrow. Thomas announced the tender. The officer's voice was crisp. Tender received. Buyer of record updated to Seabright. Revised calendar follows. Inspection reinstated. Seller to provide standard disclosures. Gwen scribbled as if ink could outrun a clock. Eliza pressed her palms flat on the table like a swimmer finding bottom. Caleb's text flashed on my screen and waited its turn. I kept my eyes on the documents. Thomas passed me a pen, not for signing, for initials that acknowledge receipt of the calendar. I wrote A. Whitmore. The A, steady the way, quiet can be fierce. The blue wave watched. Gwen gathered her folders with professional dignity. I will revisit my counsel, she said. Expect a revised settlement statement. Thomas nodded. We will expect math that counts labor as well as paint. When they left, the room breathed. The ocean laid a long silver line beyond the glass. The piece of driftwood on the cedar box looked like a brace exactly where a brace belongs. Eliza stayed seated. I do not know whether to thank you or hate you, she said. It was not cruel. It was honest. You can do neither today, I said. You can eat what Rosa packed, call your landlord, and tell him funds are coming from a lawful sale. You can meet me tomorrow at the credit union at 9. We will talk to adults who do not sell speed. I folded the handkerchief and put it back in my pocket. And you can sleep. The house will hold. After Gwen's taillights slipped away, the house exhaled. Eliza stayed at the table, palms flat as if pressing wrinkles from a life. Rosa set soup between us and left with the hush of a chapel. I moved the handkerchief beside the spoon. The blue wave waited. I'm not a villain, Eliza said. I'm tired and not as smart as I pretended. That's half, I answered. The other half is you were brave once. You can be again without borrowing speed from strangers. She did not lift the spoon. When Dad died, life turned into invoices and links to resources. I thought one fast deal would push me back to shore. You saw the rip current, I said. Fear dressed it as opportunity. She rubbed her temples. You made me feel small in there. I made the room accurate, I said. Small ends when we sit side by side. Did you always plan that gate? Your father planned structure, I said. I insisted on the lock. Storms have cousins who wear suits. She almost smiled. You always carried keys. I let that rest, then told her the plain parts. When you were 9, the roof peeled. I cataloged archives at night for a stipend. I sold a bracelet to pay the last bill. You never saw the receipt. Her eyes cleared. I thought houses stood by themselves. They stand because someone loves them with labor, I said. Often that someone was me. She finally ate, then asked, if I'd signed you away, would you have forgiven me? I'd have protected us first, I said. Forgiveness is a roof, not a slab. She set the spoon down. I'm ashamed. Shame is a heavy coat, I said. Take what warms, hang up the rest. We have work. She looked at the window. Am I still invited here after you close? This is still your home, I said. I'm not subtracting you, I'm subtracting hurry. Her shoulders dropped an inch. The credit union tomorrow, she said. 9. Yes, I said. You'll tell the truth in numbers. I'll sit beside you, quiet unless quiet hurts. She smiled, small and human. What will I owe you? Less than you fear, I said. More than a thank you. Diligence, and one dinner each quarter that you cook here. Rosa will grade you. Rosa's laugh drifted in. She set bread down and kissed Eliza's hair. Eat, she said. Hot food tells the truth. We ate. Color returned to her face. After a while, she said, when you asked who signed the contract, I felt 5. I wanted to say, I did, and have you fix it before I raised my hand. I'm not fixing you, I said. I'm setting a gate where one should have been honored. You'll do the rest. She turned the handkerchief in her fingers. This little thing won a war today. It kept us from starting one, I said. We stood our ground and named the tide. Eliza tucked the square back by my plate. Tomorrow, I'll call the landlord, the lender, the friend I owe. She breathed in for 5, out for 6. I remember. That's enough for tonight, I said. Sleep here. The spare room is made. In the morning, the ocean will count with us. She carried her bowl to the sink and washed it without being asked. The house hummed. The blue wave rested. Beyond the glass, water lifted and set. I heard it choose forgiveness that still knows where the shore is. I walked her down the hall and opened a room. Sheets, a quilt, a lamp that makes a circle of mercy. She touched the quilt's worn corner like you touch a map. In the doorway, she turned. Will you sleep? She asked. Enough, I said. I will count with the tide. She nodded and closed the door softly, as if sound might bruise. In the quiet, I rinsed bowls, folded the handkerchief, and laid it on cedar box like a lighthouse set low. Morning showed the hairline crack in the southwest wall, a faint vein no painter had chased yet. The storm had tugged. The plaster answered with honesty. I ran a fingertip along it, feeling where strength had flexed rather than failed. Houses confess in daylight. People do too if someone holds the lamp steady enough. Eliza slept in the guest room. Her breathing found the slow count. The door stood ajar the way it did when she was 9 and feared thunder. Rosa brewed coffee and set out a plate of toast. She hummed an old hymn that knows about damage and repair. I sat with the cedar box and the driftwood brace and listened to them agree. Thomas texted, inspection scheduled. Escrow acknowledged tender. Disclosures due by Friday. He added, breathe freely. The clock is ours. Before we left for the credit union, I taped the crack with paper and wrote a date on the strip. I have always believed in dating damage. It respects the truth that healing takes time. Rosa would call a mason. Eliza would call her landlord. We attended to different seams. At the credit union, the counselor was a woman with gray braids and warm patience. She asked Eliza to list every debt in a single column. She asked me to say nothing unless asked. I kept my hands folded on the handkerchief and let my breath count for both of us. Eliza wrote numbers that tasted like salt. When she finished, she looked up and did not apologize. The counselor nodded. Adults begin where truth sits in ink. Back home, I walked the house with painter's tape and kindness. A squeak in the hall, caulk tired at one window, a hinge wanted oil. I wrote each on a card. None were emergencies. All deserved attention. Grief had taught me to triage. Love insisted on maintenance. Eliza joined me on the deck with 2 mugs. She said she would take the bus until the loan reset her car. She said she would cancel a subscription that bragged about being essential. She asked whether she should sell the designer coat to fund groceries. I told her to keep one warm thing, to sell the coat that was more performance than protection. We found a line between dignity and display and stood on it together. One woman praised my backbone and suggested cutting ties for good. Another accused me of enabling failure. Both comments missed the center. I am not a judge. I am a gate with a hinge that moves on purpose. If you have ever held your child above water, you know the difference between lifting and carrying. Rosa read comments online until she grimaced and set the phone away. "Rooms without hush signs," she said again, and handed me the lemon bars to deliver to Mr. Larkin, our mason, who promised to look at the crack. He tapped the wall with a knuckle and said it was the kind that reminds you to breathe before it rains. In the evening, the inspection crew climbed the roof and praised the fasteners Richard had insisted on. "Small things done right become large mercies later," the lead inspector said. He wrote minor notes and left with respectful steps. I signed the receipt, A. Whitmore, the Blue Wave watched. Eliza stood at the window and finally let a tear fall. "I wanted to be the kind of person who never needed this," she said. I told her, need is not failure, denial is. I told her the house is pledged to my breath first. That promise stretches to the people I love, not to their shortcuts. Perhaps you are listening and saying I should have made her swim alone. Perhaps you think I should have signed and spared the fight. Tell me where you draw the line between accountability and mercy. Tell me how you learned it. I will read. The crack in the wall remained. The tape held. Healing begins with a mark and a date, and a willingness to return. I blew out the candle on the table and watched smoke climb like a thin flag at dusk. The ocean kept its count. The house hummed. Possibility felt like air that finally reached the deepest rooms. I woke before sunrise and read the calendar Thomas emailed. Escrow set inspection results to post at noon. Closing documents would be ready next week if Seabright maintained tender. The decision was not whether to fight. That weather had passed. The decision was what kind of peace to build, now that the tide had turned. I boiled water. Steam lifted like handwriting. I unfolded the handkerchief and smoothed it flat. The stitched wave was my metronome. What do I keep? What do I give? Where do I plant a gate for the next storm? Thomas arrived at 8 with a blank resolution for Seabright. He placed 2 sentences on the table, the way a carpenter lays 2 joists, and asks which line holds truer. 1. Dissolve Seabright after closing and retitle to me individually. 2. Keep Seabright intact, amend the operating agreement, and write a covenant that outlives whatever panic may visit this house again. He waited. His patience was a wide porch. "The first feels simple," I said. "The second feels right." "Then we write," he answered. We drafted with coffee and the sea counting. Seabright shall hold the villa for the benefit of Agnes Whitmore during her natural life. Rosa Alvarez shall have a right of residence as long as she wishes. No sale shall occur without unanimous consent of the board. The board will be 3, myself, Thomas as independent chair, a 3rd seat reserved for Eliza after she completes counseling, and 12 on-time payments toward her new loan. We wrote a stewardship clause. The house will host 1 community supper each summer. A scholarship in Richard's name will send 1 local kid to a maritime program each year. We inked a line about maintenance. Small things done right become large mercies later. No deferred repairs in the name of appearances. While Thomas formatted signatures, I wrote a letter to Eliza by hand. You are not cut off. You are invited with conditions that honor the weight of doors. I listed the terms we had already spoken about: interest below market, automatic payment dates, a budget she would choose in daylight and keep. I wrote a boundary clearly. The house is not collateral for your dreams. It is the shore you return to when the dreams make you forget the tide. I sealed it. I pressed the handkerchief on the envelope for a breath, as if to bless what the paper carried. Caleb texted, asking for a quote. The villa remains under family stewardship through Seabright Holdings. No quick sale. No flip. Windows open during storms. The rest is private. He replied with thank you and a promise to run a photo of gulls instead of people. Rosa came from the garden with rosemary on her sleeves. I told her about the clause with her name. Her eyes watered. Then she scolded me gently for spending words on something she had never demanded. Demand is loud, she said. Faithfulness is quiet. You have given quiet a chair. She set bowls and called Eliza down. At noon, the inspector's report arrived. Minor items. No rot. The roof praised again. Thomas printed the closing instruction. He placed a sticky note where I would initial. The choice was now a shape I could hold. Keep Seabright. Keep the gate. Keep the house pledged to breath and to people who carry keys carefully. I signed the resolution. The pen wrote steady. The blue wave watched. I felt no triumph. I felt alignment, like a door hung plumb at last. After Thomas left, I carried the cedar box to the window and set the driftwood brace across it again. The ocean moved like a paragraph that knows its period. I whispered the sentence Richard left me. Do not let silence be underestimated. Let it be the room where others hear their footsteps clearly. Then I opened the window and let the wind lift the curtains. This is my choice. This is the air we will live in. We launched the scholarship on a Saturday when the tide stood polite and the wind forgot to argue. Thomas filed the paperwork with the calm of a notary who likes sentences that hold. The name fit the porch like an old hat. Seabright Coastal Scholarship in memory of Richard Whitmore. One local student each year to a maritime program, boat building, coastal engineering, or marine safety. Nothing fancy, only skills that keep people afloat and shorelines honest. Diane from the bank brought a small podium and a check with zeros that felt sturdy rather than loud. Rosa set long tables by the dune fence, ladled chowder, and slid cornbread into waiting hands. Eliza stacked pamphlets and signed the first automatic payment on her new loan before the crowd arrived. She held her breath, then smiled at the chime. Caleb asked to cover the scholarship instead of the sale. I told him yes, emphasize hands and tide. He took photos of calloused palms and children tracing shells on the rail. He asked for a quote. I said, "Small things done right become large mercies later." We announced the application in the plain language I like for recipes. Live in our county. Write about a time the ocean taught you something school did not. Show effort more than polish. Letters of recommendation welcome. Letters from grandmothers prized. Seabright would pay tuition and a set of tools. The recipient would visit the villa each summer to tell the next applicant what went wrong and what went right. By noon, the yard filled. Fishermen I know by first name and boat name leaned on the fence. Teachers hugged Rosa. The new principal shook Thomas's hand and said stewardship without flinching. Diane announced the founding gift and the transfer schedule, looking at the teenagers as if teaching budgeting by demonstration. Wind lifted the cloths. We pinned corners with smooth rocks from the garden. 3 students told their stories at the microphone we borrowed from the church. One boy described wrenching his back on a net and learning leverage beats heroics. A girl spoke of reading tide tables the way some people read horoscopes. She trusted numbers that move. Then Maya Alvarez, Rosa's niece, stepped forward. She held her notes, but did not need them. She wanted maritime carpentry because wood remembers kindness. She said her mother's hands taught her the difference between weight and pressure. After the speeches, I set the cedar box on the porch rail and laid the driftwood brace across it like a small bridge. I told the truth about gates. We built Seabright to hold this house steady. Now it will also hold a door for someone young each year. The handkerchief stayed folded in my palm. I lifted it so the blue wave caught the sun. Richard taught me a bowline. He tied one around my waist the week the old dock failed and said, "This knot is a memory that does not give up when the water pulls." We chose Maya for the first award, not because her last name matches Rosa's, but because her hands already keep promises to wood. She cried once, then laughed and promised to return next summer with splinters to prove progress. Eliza hugged her and asked to help with the application site. The counselor promised to keep the forms simple. At dusk, we ate chowder on the steps and watched the water turn pewter. Caleb photographed empty bowls and the rope coiled on the piling like a sleeping question. He said the story would run above the fold. I asked him to tuck the mailing address quiet in the corner for anyone who wanted to send $5 and a note. He said rooms with hush signs still pass paper across pews. When the yard emptied, I carried the handkerchief inside and set it on the cedar. The house hummed. The scholarship had a ledger now. The community had a ritual. My grief had a job that felt like breathing. Evening returned us to the porch where we have always learned our weather. The tables were folded. The bowls were washed. The banner curled at its corners. Rosa watered the rosemary and swept a line of sand from the threshold. Thomas left with his pencil behind his ear and a handshake. Eliza sat on the top step, shoes off and phone dark. The deed would record next week. The inspection passed. Escrow learned the shape of our gate. The ocean kept its measured hum. The air carried salt tonight. Gulls traded complaints. I stacked facts the way a librarian stacks returns. The crack in the wall would be stitched with lime and patience. The scholarship had a bank account and a first name. Eliza met the counselor and made a budget. Gwen sent a settlement statement that read like concession. Diane scheduled the transfer for morning. I set the cedar box on the railing and laid the driftwood brace across it. The handkerchief rested on my knee like a small lighthouse. When I tilt it, the blue wave catches light. I thought of Richard tying a bowline around my waist and saying that knots are memories that do not fail when water pulls. Eliza leaned her head on my shoulder. She asked if I would still say the house is pledged to my breath first, once Seabright's name sits on a file. I told her yes. Promises keep their words when paper changes folders. She asked whether I would still ask who signed the contract when fear comes dressed as help. I told her yes. Names steady the floor. She asked if she could borrow the handkerchief on days when the world feels like a rip current. I told her yes. Return it between storms. Rosa brought tea and sat with us. She said the porch boards were due for oiling. She had a list. She liked lists that smell like cedar and soap. We talked about the next community supper and the first letter we would ask Maya to send from her program. We planned to frame it by the kitchen light so teenagers would read it while getting cornbread. Small things done right become large mercies later. When the tea cooled, I opened the east window, then returned to the step. The coastline held a thin silver edge. The tide slid forward and back like a long breath. I counted with it. In for 5, out for 6. Old rhythm that names courage. Behind us, the room glowed low. The brace cast a steady shadow. The handkerchief held a small moon. I do not know everything that waits beyond this week. I know a deed will slip under my palm. A budget will test my daughter. And there will be more paperwork than anyone admits when they sell ease on glossy cards. I know grief will still call at odd hours and ask to see the room where silence learned to stand. I know the ocean will repeat its lesson until I listen, and then it will repeat once more, for good measure. If you are listening and have stood between love and fear, tell me where you drew your line. If you keep a sentence on the table when haste knocks, share it with the people who will sit here after us. This porch has room for more chairs. This gate has a hinge built for hands that mean to keep. I will read what you send. I will keep a light on low so tired travelers can find the step without stumbling. We stayed as the sky turned pewter. Then a first star held. Eliza breathed in time with the tide. Rosa set her cup down and smiled without words. The house hummed the way a good house does when it remembers its work. I folded the handkerchief and tucked it back into my pocket. The ocean kept counting. I counted with it. And together we named the shore we would keep.